Welcome to episode 40 of Successful Demo. Each episode analyzes the theoretical practical aspects of one module release cards. Today we'll be talking about the Jinteki agenda, viral weaponization from Whispers in Nalubale. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm sorry. In addition, I'll be shortening the agenda name to viral weapons from now on because I have a lazy tongue. Now, this is an interesting agenda because it deals enough net damage to put the runner on 0 cards in hand. A very dangerous design space indeed. This warrants a digression into a game design topic, looking at previous cards that have been printed that have the same effect. You remember that in Honor and Profit, this effect was first introduced with 2 cards, Komainu the Ice and Psychic Field the Ambush. Now back then it was acceptable. As powerful as these effects were, there was some key game design cornerstones that allowed these cards to be powerful yet balanced. In Komainu's case, it was an ice, so the corp couldn't proactively trigger Komainu's effect. The runner had to make the mistake of running into a Komainu, and on top of that, not have the solution for Komainu in the Sentry Breaker. As all runners are expected to have Sentry Breakers in some way, shape or form, it's perfectly reasonable to print an ice like Komainu, knowing that the runner can eventually find a solution towards it. As for Psychic Field, however, that's not the case. Not all runners can or are expected to have solutions to net damage. However, this is compensated by the fact that it is possible to mitigate the flat line induced by Psychic Field comboing with another card through good gameplay. All you have to do is to not run last click. So that you can draw up after hitting the Psychic Field. This, of course, brings some restrictions on the corp design space. You cannot print cards that do damage as a paid ability on the runner's turn because that would make the corp's life too easy. If the runner randomly hits a Psychic Field, well, you just flip over an instant damage card and win the game. So this is something that is quite important, not just because of Psychic Field, but also because it's a pretty crappy card design overall. The runner can never go below 1 card in hand, otherwise they will die to random flippy card. We got pretty close to breaching very dangerous design space when Prisec was printed. So accessing a Psychic Field before Prisec can land you in a lot of trouble. Because that's still a lot of hoops to jump through, so I guess it's fine for now. But yeah, it's pretty dangerous, Psychic Field's design. You can see that even though there are lots of ways to mitigate Psychic Field with net damage prevention, not running last click, there are still ways in which corps can just cheese a win off with Prizek or something similar. Then we move on to recent days where we found this really obnoxious agenda called Brain Rewiring. This time not a Jinteki card. You wouldn't expect this flatline nonsense outside of Jinteki, but here we are. Brain Rewiring basically violates all the cornerstones that was established in Honor and Profit. As an agenda, it can be proactively triggered by the corporation, and the runner has no corresponding solution. Brain Rewiring doesn't actually deal damage. It forces the runner to bury their cards, an effect that has no prevention counter card on the runner side to date. As such, Brain Rewiring is basically uncounterable. The closest you can get is by preventing fast advance, which is how Brain Rewiring decks typically operate. They fast advance the agenda and then follow it up with some way to kill the runner with another source of damage. So Brain Rewiring by itself is a pretty nasty design, and if you really want to make the game more fun and less uninteractive, you would have to restrict the corp design space by not printing cards that deal more than 1 damage, because Brain Rewiring leaves you on 1 damage instead of 0 as with Psychic Field and Komainu. But as we all know, that's not the case. By now we have printed too many cards that deal damage on the corp's turn that deal more than 1 damage. Such as Show of Force and Contract Killer, both of which are combo cards in the old Brain Rewiring decks. So that we can't rewind time, so the best thing we could do, which is now in effect, is to put Brain Rewiring on the most wanted list. In my opinion, it should never have been printed in the first place. So that begs the question, where does viral weapons sit on this spectrum? It is an agenda like brain rewiring, and again, just like brain rewiring, we can't really expect all runners to have solutions to the net damage. It's less oppressive than brain rewiring in that there's still solutions. Instant speed draw is a way to overcome it, as is net damage prevention in the first place. But we still have a restriction on the corp design space. Right? Because the timing trigger for viral weaponization is very specific and quite unique indeed. It happens when on the the turn on which you score the agenda ends. Right? So it's the same trigger as breaking news, removing the 2 tags. So after you score the viral weaponization, it doesn't deal net damage immediately. Only when you pass the turn will it then inflict damage. So what this means is that the corp cannot abuse net damage operations to flatline the runner. So a neuro EMP or anything that causes a click, like contract killer. You can't use that either. You also can't use show of force because once you pass your turn as the corp, you can no longer score agendas. That means you cannot trigger a show of force after the viral weaponization because you've passed your turn. You have to wait until the runner finishes that turn, which gives you the runner a window to challenge the show of force or to simply draw up. So what I'm saying is that there's a lot fewer ways in which the corp can abuse viral weaponization with the current card pool, as opposed to brain rewiring where there were a lot of solutions. However, that being said, going back to my main point, there is still a restriction on the corp design space. From now on, the designers have to be careful to not print cards that inflict damage during this window. That is to say, when at the end of the corp's turn or on the start of the runner's turn, deal damage. Those cards will combo insanely well with viral weaponization and will lead to immediate flatlines. So something like the bioethics 2.0 pictured on the screen as I showed here. Basically the same as the old bioethics, but it triggers when the corp's turn ends instead of when the corp's turn begins. So this bioethics 2.0 would be an immediate combo card with viral weapons. Right? If this card were ever printed, I can immediately think of a very strong deck to build. You simply play viral weapons in a deck with 3 team sponsorships. When you score viral weapons with team sponsorship active, you use team sponsorship to install bioethics 2.0. The runner has no window to contest it. It will do the 1 net damage after viral weapon clears the runner's hand, and that will lead to a flat line. So yes, this basically the bottom line is watch out for these sort of cards. This design space is out of bounds now that viral weaponization is a thing. So, all that game design talk aside, let's go back to the card. With the current card pool, there are still a couple of ways to build around viral weapons to lead to those flat lines. You could run door to door, which is a damage trigger that happens at the start of the runner's turn, as I mentioned earlier. However, that's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get the combo to work. You need to have the current active. You need to have the runner tagged, otherwise the current will not deal damage, it will only give a tag. You need to beat the trace, so you have to have more credits than the runner after scoring the weapons, after playing the door to door, and after all of those hoops have been jumped through. If the runner has any sort of meat or net damage prevention at all, this combo won't work at all. A more reliable plan could arguably be Plan B, which, no pun intended, is a very good card with viral weapons actually, because the viral weapons doesn't specify corp or runner's turn. It just happens on the turn in which viral weapons were scored, and Plan B allows you to score agendas on the runner's turn. This means that you can potentially trigger viral weapons when the runner's turn ends. That is a very, very valuable trigger, because then it starts comboing with your bioethics, normal bioethics. It combos with neuro EMP, any sort of click-based card that does damage. Because viral weapons will wipe out the runner's hand at the end of their turn, and then they pass the turn over to you. You can go ham on them. So very powerful synergy indeed, but I don't find this sort of gameplay particularly fun, so we won't be showing that off. Instead, we'll look at some other way to mobilize viral weaponization. Well, it's not a very powerful card if you're not using it to kill runners, to be honest. Sure, it does X net damage, which is roughly equal to lose X clicks, which is still pretty good, make no mistake. Like Arm Intimidation dealing 5 meat damage is a huge speed bump. You can expect Viral Weaponization to be roughly similar, so let's see if we can make something work out of that. The biggest problem is, of course, it's competing with other powerful 4-2 agendas. In Jinteki, actually, now that I look at it, there are not that many. Sure, those that are available to Jinteki right now are pretty powerful in their own right, but there's not that many. All we are looking at is Nisei Mark II and Sales Team. The other Jinteki 4-2 agendas are just not that powerful in my opinion, unless you're using them to fast advance. We are looking at agendas that actually do stuff when you score them. So Nisei Mark II obviously is a gold standard agenda. It's pretty hard to beat. So what we want to do is to find a deck in which Viral Weapons is justifiable over Sales Team. So Sales Team is a positive tempo agenda for the corp, while Viral Weapons is a negative tempo agenda for the runner. So we want to find a deck that has enough forward tempo to not require the forward tempo from Sales Team, allowing us to justify playing a card that impedes the runner instead. And that's exactly the sort of deck we are going to play. A Palana hybrid rush deck that has enough forward tempo cards in it so that we can afford to score Viral Weaponizations to slow the runner down. So we are playing a lot of forward tempo cards as mentioned. Rashida, the classic gold standard forward tempo card, and Ginger City Grid. Again, a card that can save us potentially lots of clicks and credits. Along with Palana Foods, a passive ID that just keeps us moving forward, requiring us to use fewer clicks to click for credits. A very valuable trait right there in a rush deck that wants to score agendas quick and early before the runner finds solutions. So, as you remember from the previous successful demo episode where we talked about the HB42 agenda, Remote Enforcement, these sort of static effects, lose X clicks, or in the case of Remote Enforcement, gain 2 clicks and X credits worth of ice. These sort of static effects taper off in the late game because their impact is a lot more prominent when the runner is still struggling to set up and when the runner doesn't have a lot of drip economy going yet. Whereas in the late game, something like a Nisei Mark II scales much better because as you install more ice on your server, obviously the Nisei Mark II token has the potential to drain more credits from the runner. So we are running both this late game agenda in Nisei 2 and the early game agenda in Viral Weaponization. It's not that they're restricted to either late or early game as respectively. They can, they're just most effective during that period. But Nisei and Viral Weaponization is still useful throughout the entire game. Because, especially for viral weapons, it is, after all, a tax on cards on the runner. This allows us to play Viral Weaponization as a prelude to scoring an Obo Carter, right? So, opening that scoring window, forcing the runner to basically spend the entire next turn drawing cards, otherwise they won't be able to steal Obo Carters. And this also explains why we are running 21 agenda points. We want 3 Obo Carters because it's such a powerful agenda that synergizes very well with the amount of net damage we have going. Besides viral weapons, we have Fairchild 2, dealing brain damage if they click the first 2 subroutines. Taking brain damage is really bad against this deck. We also have Kakugo's inevitable net damage, as well as Marcus Batty, who can help us out in a pinch and potentially protect our Obo Carter. Finally, I want to talk a bit about Rashida. As a rush deck, it's very important to ask yourself this question. How can I reliably fire Rashida early game? This is something that I talked about with Chris Dyer when we did our CTM Rashida episode. And yes, the best way currently, as I think many players will agree, is an early hard-hitting news. You see that in CTM, and you saw that in one of our previous Kumalo videos where I just got completely wrecked after an early hard-hitting news. That is how you protect an early Rashida. Jinteki doesn't really have access to that sort of power operation, but we do have the most powerful early game ice in Cortex Lock. This is something that a lot of people will forget about. It's so strong, protecting an early Rashida. Do you let the corp gain 3 free cards, or do you lose 4 cards as the runner to Cortex Lock? It's a lose-lose situation for the runner, and there's no easy way to break a 4-strength sentry that early in the game. We also look to play some hard endurance in case they somehow do have a way to get past the Cortex lock. And of course, Fairchild 2, as I mentioned. Most runners will click through it, but at what cost? They'll either take the brain damage, which is bad for them in the later part of the game, or they will lose credits from the first subroutine, which is nasty if they find out that it's a Ginger City grid at the end instead of the Rashida they were expecting. As a 5 to trash, Ginger is heavily taxing no matter which way you cut it. So this is the sort of deck we are going to be playing. It's going to be very interesting and very fast paced. Try to keep up. Here we go. Mulligan versus keep decisions with this deck are particularly simple. As I mentioned, the key cards early game are your forward tempo cards in Ginger Grid and Rashida. If your opening hand has that along with an early ice to protect it, we keep that hand, snap keep. So here you see me mandatory draw into a Cortex lock, which was perfect. That allows me to protect my Ginger Grid, and this will allow me to res it next turn and grab a bunch of ice to fortify it. Now my opponent actually challenges it third click, and they're about to get punished real bad. Cortex Lock is going to fire here, as they don't have MK Ultra in the bin, dealing 4 net damage, hitting a Stim Hack, a Daily Cast, a Data Folding, and a Legwork. 4 big targets. The Legwork preventing them from stealing agendas from my hand, and the other 3 money cards out, just completely out. Completely worth it, and they even trashed the Ginger Grid on top of that. So now they are dirt poor, and well, I don't have a Ginger Grid, sad times. I didn't really want my opponent to trash it there, unfortunately. That happened, so we are just gonna play like a normal Glacier deck here. Ice on R&D, ice on HQ, and we'll move on. I was very tempted to get Celeb Gift money there, but with an NGO in my hand, perhaps I can, induce a bluff instead of showing my entire hand to my opponent. So, well, thankfully we draw into more money here, but what I really want is another Ginger Grid or Rashida to jam in the remote. But I do find a Jeeves Model Baroids, which is a nice consolation prize that will help me never advance my 4-2 agendas. That's why I'm playing Jeeves in this deck, so that, I don't really have to telegraph my agendas and force them to potentially having to check my Cortex lock every single time I jam something in there. So the game continues, and yes, I finally draw a forward, I wouldn't say it's a forward tempo card, but a card I want to put in my remote. So the question is, do I put the NGO front in there, or the Nisei Mark II in there? I'm gonna check my opponent's bin. There's no paperclip. Well, I'm up against Max. They're gonna draw a lot of cards. If there's one time I can score before my opponent finds the breakers, this is the time. So I'm going to install Kakugo, install Nisei, advance Nisei. No time for hedge fund here. We need to score the Nisei before they get all their breakers in the bin. They already have the other 2 breakers, they're just missing the paperclip. So I'm just going to make this play and cross my fingers, hope that they don't find the paperclip off the max mill. Right, if I score this Nisei Mark II, I'll be in very solid shape. It will enable me to score future agendas that much better. Right, so we now analyze my opponent's bin. Let's see if they found their paperclip. Well, even if they do find a paperclip, it's still a lot of money to get through the server. They have to install the paperclip, break the Kakugo, and still have to deal with the Cortex lock. They even found an inject, but no paperclip off of that. So very lucky here. Neither the Max Mill nor the inject found them the paperclip. Unfortunately, they were hiding it in hand all along. They had the paperclip, they dropped it, which means they are going to contest this remote, and with a Stim Hack on top of that. So, yep, I'm not going to tax them on credits here. They're definitely going to steal the Nisei, but I'm going to deal some net damage while I'm at it. Got a Kakugo, might as well use it. So, just get the net damage in. Which snipes a Leviar Lab Access. Okay, that's pretty decent, but they do steal the Nisei. So they are 2 for 2 on my remote right now. This max deck goes really fast. I don't like that at all. Now, I'm very poor. I'm only on 5 credits, and my remote is completely porous. What's the best thing to do here? Of course, it's to score a Nisei. This is psychological warfare at its best. I'm going down to 3 credits, now 4 credits because of my ID ability. to install double advance a card in the remote, surely it must be NGO friend, because my opponent can get through the remote so cheaply. They just don't want to, because they have to take 3 net damage if they do it. 1 from the Kakugo, 2 from the Cortex Lock. MK Ultra isn't exactly the deck breaker you want to break Cortex Lock with, so they're like, 3 net damage, I could, but I don't want to. Instead, I'm just gonna hit their HQ for agendas. So this is psychological warfare really, because I knew how unappealing the remote looks. As much as it was possible, it looks unappealing, but it's completely possible to get in there, so I would never put a Nisei in there. Nope, you're wrong, that was totally a Nisei. Bye bye, Hacktivist. So we scored a Nisei, and we are really happy about that. We still have the NGO front in our hand to play around with, assuming our opponent doesn't get to it first. So we might look into doing that, but they dropped a deep data mining on us. I was very tempted to rest the Fairchild 2 here, but firstly, I have a hedge fund in my hand I want to play next turn, and more importantly, how much free memory do they have? Only 2. So they're gonna see 3 cards of R&D. That's fine with me. So it's quite clear that my opponent is playing a high MU deck. They want to leave lots of free memory for deep data mining. They're just using the bin breakers, and they're using data folding for economy. This actually creates a very interesting dynamic, because I have the perfect ice to punish high MU decks, Cortex Lock. It will always be relevant in this matchup. So I'm going to select give here, showing the NGO front, showing them for the first time that I'm running G's Model Baroids, which kind of hints at my influence spread, but I really needed the money to defend my centrals here, both HQ and R&D. Unfortunately, they have gotten to match point because their deep data mining did do a hit on my Obo Carter. So they took the tempo hit from Obo Carter, but now they're on match point. We're not too happy about that. It's not the best start for us. We really didn't want them to steal that Nisei there, but their paperclip got it, and Stimhack got them to the remote in time. So you can see how much work Ginger Grid would have done here had they not trashed it earlier. I would have a lot more ice on my remote, like this Chiashi in my hand right now. So it was, on hindsight, a very good decision for my opponent to actually go down to 1 credit in their early turn just to trash it. Right, so now we're playing from behind. We do have a Nisei token, but it's going to be really difficult to score these agendas. Typically, you would want to feed an agenda so that you can score the next one. But here, it's pretty hard to do, because if you feed an agenda to them, they win. So I additionally have to be concerned about them winning off centrals. So spending ice on centrals when I should be, scoring agendas and putting ice on my remote. Now we find the next agenda. Hehe, it's time to score it. Or not. Yeah, so what we're gonna do here is to res G's Model Baroids and then start using its ability. It's been on the table for a while, but I've never managed to find a triple click to use it. So now we are going to install 3 cards. A new G's Model Baroids, a 4-2 agenda that can be scored with a Jeeves, and a Chiashi to protect the agenda. My opponent probably cannot contest this remote. I mean, they could. They certainly have the means, but do you really want to contest a remote that has a card in there that could be Rashida, that could be Ginger Grid, that could be NGO Friend, or Batty? All these useless cards that will take away half their money, but not win them the game. Not to mention the Nisei token. A lot of prohibitive costs involved in challenging this remote, making it very unappealing. If I were advancing this agenda, they would have more reason to pummel it, but without advancing it, they can't justify running this remote just to see an unadvanced card. Instead, the next best thing they can do is to trash the Jeeves so that they can deny me from scoring a 4-2 agenda. Sucks to be them though, because the other card I installed with the Jeeves click was Jeeves. So yeah, they didn't manage to trash both Jeeves. I'm going to score this Viral Weaponization on my turn, and here we go. Do 4 net damage, that's 4 clicks my opponent lost. But if you notice, it did more than that, because the 4 net damage sniped Knife, Stimhack, Deep Data Mining, Leg Work. A lot of big cards again. An R&D pressure card, a HQ pressure card, a remote pressure card, Stimhack, giving you money to pressure the remote. And a knife that deals with my Chiashi and Kakugo really well. That was a big win. Viral Weaponization that turn did not just cost my opponent 4 clicks as they spend their entire next turn drawing up. The more important factor here is that it cost them a lot of pressure cards that they could have used on this final turn to make my life hell, to give them a lot of chances of winning off Hail Mary runs. Now they can't go for a deep dig of R&D. They can't go for legwork on HQ. Well, they could, but they have to use the same old thing, which costs more clicks, which they can't afford because I have a Nisei token. They need to be spending all their clicks running. So if this is an Obokata, I win. So they have to actually contest my server 1 here. But they're retrieving a Fem. So interestingly, I would win the game right here had this been an Obokata. I would just use the Nisei token and score this Obokata. So yeah, a bit of lacking of foresight there. My opponent forgetting that I have the Nisei token and getting to the remote 1 turn too late. But in any case, that wasn't an Obokata, it was an NGO front. So it's a bluff. I'm just wondering whether it's worth it to spend 12 of my credits to tax my opponent 3 credits off the Fem bypass. The obvious answer is nope. So we are just going to let them through. They take the Kakugo net damage, spend a bunch of credits breaking Kakugo, and take the 1 Cortex Lock damage. I'm slowly but surely plinking away at the hand, only for it to be an NGO. So I guess I'm winning there. Not too bad, making them waste a Fem on an Unrest Ice. But that does neuter my Shiashi, which is quite annoying, except that I've just drawn a second Shiashi. Okay, great. So I can easily replace this Shiashi on the remote with a new unfemmed Shiashi and get the IPO out of the way as well. Misplay there, I clicked on the IPO when I had 2 clicks remaining. I intended to put the Shiashi before playing the IPO. So interesting, I could have won the game there, but I did not draw one of the remaining 2 Obokatas in my deck. Right, so now we have a pretty decent remote going. Our opponent's not rich at all. Because they are on 3 out of their 4 MU, their data foldings actually turn off. Very subtle nuance there. That means that they are getting less money than the deck is designed to produce, which means that I can potentially tax them out with forcing them to run through 2 Chiashis. Now I'm going to draw up here to find an agenda, but it turns up short. I'm really looking for an Obokata here. I don't want to see any of the other agendas. Maybe a Nisei Mark II, but what I really want is the Obokata that protects itself and wins me with just scoring 1 more agenda. Right. So yeah, not finding it is a huge deal because this gives my opponent 1 more turn to set up, 1 more turn to get daily cast credits, 1 more turn to get liberated accounts money. Now they are in healthy range. Now they can afford to hit my remote twice through the Nisei Mark II token. That's not good for me. Right now I'm hinging more on the Kakugo doing work for me. Kakugo dealing net damage means that they cannot steal Obokatas. So maybe that's what I'm looking towards. Now, another form of psychological warfare here. I'm going to induce my opponent into running server 1 by playing 3 cards as such. They saw me score a viral weaponization from a never advanced state. This could be another one. The remote's obviously a GS model Balroyce. No mistake, make no mistake about that. So they know that this could very well be a 4-2 agenda in the remote, and that's a Jeeves in the other remote that I protected with an ice because I don't want them trashing my Gs for free. In reality, it's not an agenda in server 1, it's just a Ginger City grid. But it's still a win-win for me. If they challenge a Ginger grid, they are going to have to pay the Chiashi tax. It's very expensive. If they don't challenge the Ginger grid, I'll get Ginger grid triggers. I can advance the taxingness of my remote. So if you're my opponent here, you're facing down this 4-2 agenda and Gs, what looks like anyway. Psychologically, your best line of play would be to contest the Gs. It has fewer eyes protecting it, and yeah, it stalls out scoring the 4-2 for 1 more turn. So that's exactly what they did. Smart play by my opponent, gets their Black Orchestra out, and trashes the Jeeves. Again, this is still a winning play for me. That Black Orchestra was expensive. It cost them 6 credits to break, and they had to trash the data folding, and then they spent 5 credits to trash my Jeeves. I just wiped out half the credit pool by making this psychological play. They were forced to trash the Jeeves even though there was no 4-2 in the remote after all. So I'm winning right here, and I'm winning even more as I draw another Fetch Out 2 on the remote. And then the agenda came. I did draw my Obokata before the other 3 4-2s. Lucky me. Let's put it in the remote and attempt to score it, advance it the next turn. Again, they can't contest this remote now. It's a never advanced card. They don't know for sure. It could be a Rashida. It could be a Batty. Right? You can't run a 4 ice remote without assurance that's an agenda. So they're just going to spend this turn setting up, I guess. Maybe pressuring centrals, but they need to be able to threaten 2 runs on my remote. Now they make a very gross mistake here in levying, thinking that they have a window to levy. This is a big mistake because it cost them 5 credits that is potentially 5 credits that can be used to break through my remote. And this signals to me it's go time. It's time to score the Obokata here. I draw a Cortex Lock and am given the choice to install it with Ginger Grid. I chose not to here because Cortex Lock is blank, right? They have 4 out of 4 MU taken up. There's no point getting the Cortex Lock on the remote. If anything, I want the Cortex Lock in hand because given the amount of time it took for me to ponder on my move, they might be induced to think that there's an agenda in hand. Spoiler alert, there aren't any. So if they make a run on HQ, they're gonna turn up short. So, another element of psychology there. Making my opponent think that there's agendas in hand because of the way I paused on drawing my mandatory draw. It could have easily been an agenda I drew. Now I'd be stuck with a 1 in 3 chance for my opponent to win off HQ. Now they do contest my remote, taking the Nisei token into account this time. But can they get through twice? That's the real question. I have more than enough money to res my remote thanks to all the Polana credits. My opponent has been generously donating Polana credits every turn because they are max. They're forced to draw every turn. And yeah, because they levy it, suddenly they find themselves short on credits to deal with the remote. They break the Fairchild, they break the Chiashi. Well, they are forced to break the Chiashi here. If they take the 4 net damage and jack out at this point, or rather if they jack out at any point during this run, I will simply use the Nisei Mark II token last click, and they have no chance of winning. So they are basically committed into the remote run at this point. Had they wanted to pressure any of my centrals, they should have done it from the get-go instead of contesting this 4 ice remote. So as you see here, Ginger Grid doing a lot of work. Even though it made only 1 install, it was a very important install. The Fairchild 2 dealing a lot of tax, forcing my opponent to trash a Femme Fatale with the first subroutine and pay 3 credits. The trashing of Femme is very, very relevant when I'm trying to score an Obokata here, because it frees up 1 memory and makes Cortex Lock live. It's now live, right? So very, very exciting times here. My opponent obviously commits to the run, goes all the way through, lets the Cortex Lock fire because they don't have enough credits to break it. And now they're down to 5 cards. They're gonna hit the Obokata here. Nope. End the run. So they can't rerun the remote. Even if they had a stim hack, they wouldn't have enough money to get through it, right? They would spend all their money paying for the Chiashi. They have no money to break the Cortex Lock. They would take too much net damage and can't steal the Obokata with stim hack. It didn't matter because they didn't draw stim hack anyway, so instead they went for a legwork, and as I mentioned, there was nothing in HQ. So we are able to close out the game. Well, a lot more psychological warfare than viral warfare going on in there. Not a lot of use seen from that viral weaponization, but a lot of remote bluffs, a lot of inducing my opponent to make suboptimal plays, forcing them to spend 10 credits or so contesting useless stuff like NGOs and Jesus Motobioroids. In the end, the net damage tax was too much for my opponent to handle. Despite them getting a free card draw every turn, I was still able to construct a remote that rendered it impossible to steal my Obokata. That remote server at the end there was so beautiful. It brought tears to my eyes. No, seriously, the ice and the agenda synergize so well in this deck. I mean, I got lucky that the ice, worked out the way they did. But yeah, Fairchild 2 basically just enabled everything down the line. Sure, it's easy to break as a Bioroid. You can click through it, but not when the co-op has a Nisei counter. Right? You need to have enough clicks to make multiple runs. So fine, you have Black Orchestra, but Black Orchestra sucks. You can only break 2 subroutines. Breaking all 3 with Black Orchestra is too expensive. So you either have to take the brain damage option, which will leave you unable to steal Obokata, or take the trash and install card option, where because my opponent had no other installed cards left, they were forced to trash a program of their own, activating the Cortex Lock that was further down the line. Not to mention Chiashi and Kakugo, both big barriers that pull their weight. One that hacks the run-on credits, making it impossible to rerun the server without a stim hack, and the other making it just flat out impossible to steal Obo Carter at the end. It was so good, in fact, that I could have bluffed a normal 4-2 agenda in that particular scenario. Like if I drew a Nisei Mark II instead of the winning Obo Carter, I could have done the exact same play of install double advance, and my opponent would still not have reran it even with a stim hack. Yeah, that's the level of mind games, level of psychological warfare we are at here. Speaking of warfare, it's time to go for a memorial service for those who've fallen victim to viral weapons. That agenda did work this game, and it did a lot more work than I expected. I anticipated it would, cost my opponent 4 clicks, which it did. Draw, 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 draw. Nice tempo speed bump. But what I didn't expect it to do was to snipe that many useful cards from my opponent's hand. And I realized that viral weaponization is actually a good way to indirectly protect your centrals from power run events like deep data mining, like legwork, or a knife that could easily undo your hard work in raising ice. Right? When you score viral weaponization, or any agenda for that matter, it typically opens a corresponding stealing window for your opponent, as you're typically low on credits after scoring, or you spend an entire turn advancing cards when you could have shot up your centrals. So it's usually a very good time for the runner to launch a counter attack. But they can't counter attack if they lose all their cards in hand. You simply can't do that against Jinteki. So that's what viral weaponization brings to the table. A way to show up the weakness that is typically inherent when you immediately after scoring an agenda. In this particular game, it also did something quite amazing. By sapping away those cards from my opponent's hand, they were induced into playing their second levy. Because even though my Obo Carter was scored many turns after the viral weapons, my opponent got to a point where they had no cards remaining in stack and a hand size of 4. With a Kokugo threatening them on the remote, they could not actually afford to threaten the remote run if there was an Obo Carter in the remote, because the Kokugo would deal net damage. They wouldn't be able to steal any Obo Carters, so they were actually forced to levy in order to get more cards to steal Obo Carter, and they levied at the exact wrong time, the exact turn where I drew the Obo Carter, allowing me to double advance in front of their face while they didn't have enough money to run the server twice. So that was the magic that viral weapons did. I must say it was a very best case scenario this game, being able to snipe all these power events out of my opponent's hand and to induce the levy. I think in most games it won't have that much impact, but hey, I think if there's one thing I've managed to accomplish this game is to illustrate the superiority of viral weapons over corporate sales team, a gold standard agenda, in a deck where you already have a lot of forward tempo, where you don't need to worry about the extra 10 credits that sales team would otherwise give you. Viral weapons is a great way to hinder your opponent and to potentially open new routes for closing out the game with the final agenda. Thanks for watching and happy net running. See you next time.